Good afternoon and welcome to the Istituto Affari Internazionali. My name is Ferdinando Nelli Ferrucci. I am the president of the Institute, and I'm very pleased and honored to welcome you in this rather warm afternoon in Rome. And I'm pleased and honored also to open this seminar, which the Institute has organized together with Southern Europe, a leading network of think tanks from countries in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, and also with ETTG, a network of European think tanks. Both think tanks are very deeply committed to development and cooperation for development. Today's Consultation Forum will focus on the future of FAO. And I think that the timing has been chosen back to back with the UN Summit, Food System Summit, which took place in Rome for 3 days until yesterday, if I remember correctly. Concluded its proceedings only yesterday afternoon. The main objective of this forum is to discuss the role of FAO in addressing current food security challenges and problems and priorities. We have invited to this end representatives from FAO, experts, academia, from civil society organizations, from think tanks, and also from development cooperation practitioners. And I'm very grateful for those that have accepted our invitation. As I mentioned a moment ago, the UN Food System Summit concluded its proceedings only yesterday. Its main objective was to review the commitments that were undertaken at the 2021 Food System Summit, and assess the progress realized in implementing the outcomes of that summit and its contribution to the achievement of the 2030 agenda. To my knowledge, I have not been involved in the summit proceedings, but I have been told that it's been a success. It brought together around 2,000 in-person participants from something like 161 countries, including 22 heads of state and government, more than 100 ministerial delegates, and over 150 non-state actors, organizations, as well as representatives of the whole of the UN system and other international organizations. The discussion at the summit were concluded by the adoption of the Secretary General call to action, which focused on 6 main priority areas that would need urgent action: incorporating food system strategy into national policies for sustainable development, establishing food system governance that engages all sectors and stakeholders for a whole of society approach, combining the short, medium, and long term, investing in research, data, innovation, and technology capacities, including stronger connections to science, experience, and expertise, deepening participation of women, young people, and indigenous people at local level, promoting increased engagements of businesses, including through public-private partnerships to shape the sustainability of the food systems. And finally, last but not least, ensuring access to short and long-term concessional finance, investments, budget support, and debt restructuring. Let me also add that a review of the progress realized towards sustainable, equitable, healthy, and resilient food system is crucial, particularly if we consider the recent alarming evidence on the state of food security and the need to advance at a faster pace in the implementation of the 2030 agenda. Amid mutable, interlinked crises that include climate change, which is there since quite some time, but also the consequences of the war in Ukraine and the other important regional local crisis, the global food system is experiencing increasing pressures. Global hunger rates are still significantly higher than pre-COVID-19 levels, with notable regional variations, but also with the hunger increasing in Western Asia and the Caribbean and in all the region of sub-Saharan Africa. The total number of food insecure individuals in 2022 was still approximately of 900 million persons, an increase of 180 million compared to 2019, a worrying development, in fact. A preliminary assessment of the roughly 140 SDGs targets that are quantifiable show that only about 15% are on track. Close to half are moderately or severely off track, and some 30% have either seen no progress at all or have gone back below the 2015 baseline. So these data are certainly partial and incomplete, but they underline the need for further mobilization of the international community to face the challenges of food security. And I conclude by expressing my sincere hope that this consultation of this afternoon will contribute to raise the awareness of the need of more financial resources, better coordination of efforts both at national and at multilateral level, increased commitments for the realization of the SDGs targets. I also hope that the dialogue that we are promoting with this event between experts from the Global South, FAO representatives, key stakeholders, will help promote the necessary food system transformations with the focus on small farmers' investments in technologies needed to improve and increase productivity, and on the importance of strengthening the governance of the food system in general terms. Now, I have concluded my very brief remarks, and I'm very pleased to give the floor to Mr. Ibrahim Attieh, Distinguished Fellow at Initiative Prospective Agricole. I think this must be said in French. Member also of the Southern Voice Network, to whom I'm very pleased to leave the floor. Thank you again for your attention, and the best wishes for the important debate or discussion of this afternoon. Thank you.
Mr. President, distinguished panelists, and dear participants, my name is Ibrahim Attieh. I'm the Deputy Director of Feed the Future Senegal Policy System Services, USAID-funded project but implemented by a consortium, the IPAR. And I'm also a distinguished fellow at IPAR, a West African think tank based in Dakar. IPAR is a founding member of Southern Voice, and as a research director for IPAR, I was one of the initiators of this network and have been a steering committee member and the African coordinator for this network for several years. I'm also a member of the independent group of scientists tasked by the UN Secretary General to draft the 2023 Global Sustainable Development Report. The report will be out in September. Southern Voice is a network of 66 think tanks based across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and the Caribbean. We work actively to actively center Southern knowledge with global development debates and processes. Today, at the exit of the United Nations Food Systems Summit +2, Stocktaking Moment, we are here in Rome to talk about some shared priorities for the development of strong local food systems and where these relate to the work of FAO will be doing in the coming years to combat food insecurity. We must start by acknowledging that the current state of affairs is very complex. The consequences of COVID, of conflicts, including regional conflicts, namely the war in Ukraine and of climate change have brought on additional disruptions to the particular challenges each country was already facing. This was clear in the discussion we hosted with our member think tanks ahead of today's events. We spoke with experts from Africa, Asia, and Latin America to understand what are the biggest obstacles to the development of strong local food systems that can adequately meet the needs of their population in their country, and what addressing them would require, and in particular, what type of support from FAO would best unlock the necessary transformation at this time. While the challenges were probably as diverse as there were countries represented in those consultations, the priority brought forward revealed 3 common levers for transformation of food systems, which we will be discussing today, and they relate to technology, governance, and agency. But first, let me give you an overview of the main challenges that came up. A lot of these are related to the condition of smallholder farmers. Smallholder producers are strongly affected by the effect of climate change, unpredictable weather events, rainfall, and drought, which aggravate living conditions often constrained by limited productivity due to traditional farming practices. These small-scale producers also suffer from limited access to markets, with most profits in the hands of middlemen. Impediments to their flourishing include limiting incentives, limited access to insurance, extension services, and support. The multiple shocks that we talked about already, and Mr. President talked about already, linked to the pandemic, conflicts, and the energy crisis, and rising food prices, particularly affect those smallholder producers, as they are producers, but at the same time, they are consumers of goods. And this has particularly raised production costs, but also those smallholder producers who most of the time do not have the surpluses have to cope with rising prices as consumers. And they are obliged to source their resources, their food from the market. The situation in various countries and across regions differs significantly. Some of the differentiating factors include existing policies relating to exports, to imports, to local production. So there are some diversity between countries. It can be linked also to the geography of the country or to the rural-urban distribution of the country. Let me talk about the 3 levels we discussed during our consultation. Across contexts, 3 areas of action consistently came up as necessary levers which may be used to unlock necessary food system transformations with smallholder farmers at the center. The first is technology. Investment in technology, where aligned with the needs of smallholder farmers, can significantly enhance their productivity, prevent waste along the food value chain, and strengthen the resilience of local food systems. This may include various types of suitable production, climate-smart and irrigation technologies, as well as post-harvest technologies to reduce food waste and enable smallholder farmers to engage in value-added production. Further, meaningful integration of information technologies, centering the needs of smallholder farmers, can strengthen smallholder farmers' prevention of and adaptability to climate events and other disruptions by enabling access to accurate, up-to-date information. It can also support better targeting of their needs through a period of crisis, as well as facilitate their networks and direct connection to consumers. The second area is governance. Findings across countries also highlighted the importance of strengthening the governance of food systems. Outdated laws, limited regulatory frameworks, or implementation deficits impact both the production and the consumption of food. At this time, experts agreed that FAO's support would be key in the establishment of a consistent food price structure, and also the design and implementation of policies that guarantee that the food that is consumed is safe, provide adequate nutrition. And further, the complexity of food systems calls for mechanisms for coordinated actions between various sectors, including agriculture, water, weather, trade, health, to be put in place, which many southern governments may need support with. We know that in terms of governance, we have to deal with multiple sectors because it's agriculture, it's livestock, it's fisheries, it's also in the industry, it's trade. But at the same time, we need also collaboration between stakeholders. So those horizontal collaboration also means that we are multi-sector, multi-actor. So the governance of this is very complex. That's why we need capacity building for governments to be able to take up this issue to the benefit of smallholder farmers. Finally, we find that smallholder farmers can be significantly helped by providing enabling conditions for them to exercise agency. That's the third point. This includes actively supporting organizations and networks of smallholder farmers. These allow for collective bargaining, political organization, as well as the sharing of expensive resources such as technological equipment. Public and private sectors should also partner towards providing tailored insurance and extension services to smallholder farmers to enable them to sustain their operations in times of uncertainty. Indeed, they are often not in position to take risk, which in turn limits the long-term productivity and development of their enterprises. These are the 3 points that our discussion today will focus on. They align quite well with some of the key calls of action from the UNFSS+2. Mr. President talked about this. And these include ensuring multi-stakeholder governance, putting research, technology, and innovation at the heart of the transformation process for acceleration, guaranteeing full participation of women and youth, scaling up innovation for smallholder farmers, and strengthening local and regional food systems. I would be joined by 2 of my Southern Voice colleagues from Pakistan and Peru, whom you will meet soon. We are also honored to have with us 3 guests who will be helping us understand together where the 3 levers we'll be discussing fit into the work of FAO through the coming years, and where joint efforts will best support achieving their transformative potential with smallholder farmers at the center. To introduce them, I will now welcome my colleague Francesco Rampa, who will be moderating today's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahima. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Francesco Rampa. I head the Sustainable Food Systems team at the European Center for Development Policy Management. We're a proud member of the ETTG. And I just want to say also that we are so proud and happy to collaborate with the Southern Voice. This collection of think tanks we believe can add a lot to policy discussions, and this is an example, we hope. I also just attended the 3 days of the Food System Summit. We can talk about it during the debate. I will not elaborate at this stage, but I can just say that the enthusiasm of the governments and the high-level participation, as the President has just reminded us, made interaction a bit limited. So it's really the purpose today is to leave enough space, apart from hearing from our fantastic panel, to really enough space for you online and here in the room for really interaction. So we already welcome you to prepare your questions to the panelists. Just technically, a couple of points. We do have translation, so please use it. I don't know if you're here in the room, you need translation online. We have translation, I believe, in 3 languages, and I will be taking 2 rounds of questions, to which I ask, please, the panelists stick to the time, 5 minutes per response, please, so that indeed we do have time for you on the floor to come up with your questions and comments. I will start with Madame Lorena Alcazar, who is a lead researcher al Grupo de Análisis para el Desarrollo en Perú. We heard Dr. Ibrahima summarizing these challenges, technology, governance, and enabling conditions. How does that resonate in Peru? Is anything happened recently to try to address these challenges and really move towards transformation of the food system, or in particular support to smallholders? How do you see moving in that direction, and is there any remaining obstacles maybe that you can tell us about? Madame, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank for the opportunity of being here. As was mentioned before, I come from GRADE, which is a think tank in Peru. We work in most development issues, and we have like 40 years of experience. And since a few years, we are part of Southern Voice, and we are it's such an interesting work to deal with all the think tanks from around the world. And GRADE, we have the great pleasure of being the host of Southern Voice, so we work very closely with them. And that's why I'm here representing Latin America and, as much as I can, but mostly Peru, and to participate in this important debate. I think from Latin America, normally we don't see it as the poorest countries, but recently we are going through very difficult times, and food insecurity is a real and very important issue. We've reached food insecurity, considering moderate and severe, is 40% of the population of the region, Latin American and the Caribbean, which is quite high. And furthermore, it's the region that has faced the largest increment in the last years, probably because we were hit very hard by COVID. Peru was, I think, the main country, the country that suffered more from COVID in terms of death per capita. So in the region in general, we face very hardly the COVID pandemic, but then we have economic crisis, political crisis, international crisis, all that affecting us a lot. So we are going back to levels of 2000 in terms of food insecurity. This is a big issue. Together with food insecurity, we face hunger, which was not such a big issue before these last years. Hunger, poverty, and malnutrition. The percentage of children under 5 that are stunted is more than 11%. That was 2020, and we don't have figures for these last years, but looking at feeding practices, looking at food insecurity, and looking at family practices regarding health and health control of children, for example, all the things have worsened a lot. We had great improvements during the last decade, more than 40% of improvement in terms of nutrition, but we are going backwards again. And another big issue, another challenge, big challenge for the whole world, but definitely for Latin America, is food prices inflation. In 2022, the food inflation was 43.9% in comparison to 23% globally. So it's a major issue in Latin America. And it's interesting or really sad that this happens at the same time that Latin America is the world's largest net food exporting region. So it's, of course, as always, is very heterogeneous, and we have countries with all kinds of situations. But in average, as a region, we are net exporters. We export soy, meat, many fruits and vegetables. So it's and at the same time that we are net exporters, we face this very, very critical food insecurity, hunger, problems of nutrition, etc. And we are also net importers of some food like cereals. But it's important to note that what we face in terms of how do we deal with this food insecurity and prices and food systems is not only going to affect us, but it's going to affect the world, because we are important also for the world in terms of exports. But the big problem for us then is of course also important to increase productivity, to increase export, to increase income. But the big problem is how to make sure that our poor population reaches affordable, adequate, nutritional diet. And that's not happening, and that's what we need to deal with. It's not a matter of enough supply, it's a matter of affordability, or also on what are we producing, what do we need. So what is needed in terms of what is being discussed here and what we have from the consultation, we know the smallholders farmer is a big issue, and we need to increase productivity. We need better technology to reach these small farmers who are normally in rural areas in our countries and do not have good access to information. Further, they don't have access to markets. We have poor infrastructure. We need technology. We need climate smart technologies. We need access to insurance, to credit for these smallholder farmers. And we also need to deal with environmental sustainability, of course. And we've been doing that not only in Latin America, but in other countries from the global south for the last decade or so. We've been dealing also with programs in this line of thought that we not only have need to provide support to the poor, but we also need to help them leave poverty. So we have these graduation programs where we have a lot to learn from. These programs normally come with technical assistance, with credit support, with information support, and we've seen very good results from these programs, but still there's a lot to learn, there is a lot to improve, particularly because every country is different, every region is definitely different, but every country is different, and within a country we also face very high heterogeneities, and we need these programs to adequate to local context, to the local program of agriculture, and as Ibrahima was saying, it's not only agriculture, it's fishing, it's livestocking, etc. And we need to adapt to all these needs, and also there's a problem of coverage, all kinds of support to smallholders, producers, farmers, and to all these kind of programs. Since we are facing scarcity of resources, coverage is very small. So we need more investment. We need more work from the government, from the private sector, from civil society to deal with this. So I guess I stop here. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lorena. Our journey now takes us not too far. We go to the Dominican Republic, and we're very happy to have Mario Arvelo, who is the permanent representative of the Dominican Republic to the Rome-based agencies, but he is also importantly, he can speak with a lot of experience. Not only he was the former chair of the Committee on World Food Security. It is a very, very important multi-stakeholder platform here in Rome and worldwide, where he is now currently also the chair of the steering committee of the UN Decade of Family Farming. So really someone who speaks very closely to our debates. Ambassador, how do you see the challenges summarized by Ibrahima, and what is the situation in the Dominican Republic? Has progress been made?
Thank you very much for your introduction. Thank you for having me. I have to say that I'm disappointed because I misunderstood the timing. I thought it was going to be given 5 hours and not 5 minutes. That was a joke, of course. But seriously, I am not an expert in anything. The reason that I am sitting here is because I have been in Rome for quite some time, and like Mr. Rampa just said, I've had the honor of chairing a number of multilateral governance platforms and committees and commissions and so on, and have accumulated, because of this, some knowledge. I have had to read the papers and attend the meetings and participate, and so not being an expert technically in any of these issues, I have accumulated this, I would say, knowledge. And in speaking about these things, and after listening to Dr. Ibrahima, of course, there's very little that, and Ms. Alcázar as well, there's very little new things that one could say, because we all know that the transformation of food systems is extremely complex, and also there's a diversity of possible solutions. From the Dominican Republic, I could share with you that we have had some experiences that are worth sharing. One of them is that we became, if my memory serves me right, we were among the 10 first countries to include the right to food in the Constitution. We didn't invent anything, we just looked at Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, approved on 10 December 1948, and in Article 55 of our Constitution, there is a right to food. Also, we came up with the law on food sovereignty and security, and that's work that was finalized in 2016. I was proud to have been brought into the process, so I could say that I am one of the co-drafters, even though I wasn't in the parliament or any such thing. But we brought the experience that we had in the Committee on World Food Security from the reform in 2009, and it was a truly inclusive process in which not just it was approved unanimously by a parliament in which every shade of politics is represented, from the far right to the far left and everyone in between, but also including civil society, the private sector, international financial institutions, academia, research centers, and so on. We have also been very much investing so much in school feeding, in the understanding that it is in the first years of one's life that one creates not just the body that we will have in future, but also the mind that we will have in future in terms of having conscience about healthy diets. And then the kids would bring this knowledge to the family. Green procurements, the government purchases for school feeding, 0 kilometer, and also foodstuffs with minimal processing, minimal impact on the environment. I could go on and on. I would underline the private sector investment and the civil society. On the civil society, we all know that the existence of the UN system and the fact that we have to be inclusive is a consequence of the inability of national governments to resolve hunger and malnutrition. If a president or a prime minister or a parliament could decide by decree or fiat that there's zero hunger, then there will be no hunger. But of course, it is not a political decision. Political will is the first step, but money is needed, allocating that money, absorption capacity, creating human capital, is extremely important. And then civil society is an actor that has sadly been absent from these discussions. A sizable portion of civil society actually boycotted the summit in 2021. And even though we had slightly more visible participation from civil society during these past 3 days, they still need to come fully on board because they are one of the wheels of this car. Again, I have notes that I could fill out the 5 hours, but I will conclude by saying that private sector involvement is crucial, not just because sources for financing need to tap into resources from the private sector, but also because any change, any transformation will have resistance, will meet resistance. And the private sector needs to be part of the equation in terms of understanding that their acceptance of food systems transformation is not just necessary for the transformation to actually occur, but that their bottom line will not be affected, not necessarily. Of course, there will be some losers in any change, but the private sector needs to be acknowledged as an actor, and the private sector needs to collaborate because it's in their best interest to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, also for keeping your preliminary remarks so short. You clearly can feel that you had a lot more to say. We will come back to this, and it's my pleasure now to give the floor to Mr. Dr. Abid Suleri, who is the Executive Director of the Sustainable Development Policy Institute in Pakistan. Doctor, what is the current progress in Pakistan? What steps have been made towards improving the food systems, and what are the remaining challenges? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and my special gratitude to Southern Voice and the co-organizers for providing us this opportunity to share what's happening in our respective countries. Now I wear multiple hats. I'm a researcher, a civil society activist, and I also got an opportunity to assist the former Prime Minister looking after his agriculture transformation plan. Now, Ibrahima rightly mentioned the current situation. It requires a whole of society, whole of government approach. But then from Pakistan's experience, I can tell you that there are whole of problems that we are facing, the countries, developing countries. So the CCC crisis, COVID, climate change, and conflict, one of the manifestation is increasing food insecurity. For example, Pakistan, as you know, that last year it suffered from super floods. 33 million people, more than 50% of Italy's population, they got displaced, and out of them 9 million they became food insecure, and our food security record even before flood was not very impressive. We fall on serious hunger level on global hunger index, 95th out of 160. Unfortunately, we have one of the highest child wasting, 17.7%, one of the highest child stunting, 37.6%, and the infant mortality rate, meaning that the children, they may not be able to see their 5th birthday, is 6.4%. Now, with all of this, with the floods in place, government of Pakistan was not able to fulfill the commitments that it made with the IMF. And the result was IMF suspended its loan. Now, when IMF suspended its loan, all the bilateral and multilateral, they also suspended their assistance and their loans. Even the Geneva pledges, the Geneva conference, which was held by United Nations to help the survivors of Pakistani flood victims in January 2023. Those pledges, they also got linked with IMF program that we will only receive the support if IMF provides its disbursement. And that was sheer crunch on dollar reserves. Now, the third C, which is conflict, Now, Russian wheat is non-kosher. Ukrainian wheat is out of access due to weak implementation on Black Sea grain deal. Now, during floods, half of Pakistan's cotton crop got destroyed, and almost 1/3 of Pakistan's wheat reserves, they got destroyed. Now, there is a situation where we don't have dollars, we cannot access any multilateral or bilateral assistance because IMF is not happy with us, and we are not able to even reach to the wheat suppliers. And I think that sort of situation where when we talk of transformation, when we talk of global governance transformation, this is what we are talking about, that FAO and international financial institutions, they need to be more responsive to climate vulnerabilities, and they need to be more responsive in case of emergencies. Pakistan was on the brink of default only now, 2 weeks ago. The government, it signed a new standby agreement with the IMF, and now they have to again increase the prices and tariffs, etc., which is fundamental for improving the things. But someone has to bear the cost of transit and cost of transformation and cost of transformation of food systems. And I think as a global community, we need to see that most often the cost has to be borne by the poorest among the poorest in any society, be in developed world or in developing countries. And I think for me, what I am expecting from all this debate and what I was expecting the debate in Paris last month, the global financial system transformation, I echo the UN Secretary General's appeal, where he very candidly says that the current system is rotting, and the current financial system is rotting, and it is failing world's poor. So if we want food security and if we want food systems to work, we need to look at all these interlinked problems. It's not only the problem of hunger, it's also the problem of accessing to funding in time, and also accessing to funding without strings attached when it's emergency. I'll conclude here, and I'll be happy to share further in second round, but this is what my thought, echoing what Ibrahima just mentioned.
Thanks so much, Dr. Suleri. It's a fantastic intervention, and not only shows that the variety of situations across the different regions of the world, but also, as you say, how often the international governance system isn't walking the talk. In fact, it is now my pleasure really to give the floor to Ms. Corina Hawkes, who is the Director of the Division of Food Systems and Food Safety of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN. Corina Hawkes recently joined FAO, but if I can speak of a personal note as well, I myself am a great fan. Corina Hawkes has been a top thinker in the food system space for quite a number of years, and it is, again, on a personal note, fantastic to see that someone who was on our side of the think tank world, or of the intellectuals and those with great ideas, entering an important, crucial organization like the FAO. Ms. Hawkes, maybe it's also important that you start relaying to us a bit how you felt in the last 2 days. I myself attended a big plenary session when Ms. Hawkes was in fact facilitating a session amongst leaders on food system transformation in practice. That was the name of the Food System Summit session. Food system transformation in practice, success, challenges, and the way forward. So how does what you heard there relate to some of the points made here? Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Fantastic to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation. Yes, I've been at FAO for 5 months now, so I'm still adjusting, but very excited for the opportunity. The UN Food System Summit +2 Stocktake Moment, which is just completed, was, I mean, I have to say, it feels quite good, having been quite involved, that it's been done successfully. In moderating the session and facilitating this 3-hour-long plenary, as Francesco mentions, it came out very clearly to me that there is a lot of action that is taking place to address these problems that we've just been talking about. So there is action investing in infrastructure, there's action talking about seeds and water, climate sensitive agricultural methods, access to markets, much less referenced on the consumption side, I have to say. I have a history of working on health and nutrition issues in the food system. They were mentioned much less, representing the dominance of ministers of agriculture, of course, who were largely in the room. So a lot of actions that were going on in the context of the concerns of the ministers who were speaking and the people on the panels, of the climate crisis, of conflict, of the water situation, of food insecurity. So a lot of actions that were taking place, that was very clear. There is action that is absolutely happening, but it's not transformative. I think that was really one of my takeaways, and that's not to insult or degrade or undermine the important work that is happening, but it still feels like it's doing a bit here, it's doing a bit there, it's trying to make one connection between X and Y, but it's not fundamentally going to shift the system to be more sustainable, more resilient, more inclusive, and more efficient, to use the terms that we use at FAO. Why isn't it? I think it's not transformative because it's not, what I could see was that it's not really transforming the fundamentals of the system. And the fundamentals of the food system are economic in nature. The food system is, like so many other systems, heavily influenced by the economic incentives under which it operates. It's influenced by the way that the world runs when it comes to the economic models on which we base decision making. So the fundamental of the economics of the system and the incentives that creates, and the malalignments that creates between the economic goals of the system with the environmental and the social and the health and nutrition goals of the system are not aligned. So we're not seeing a transformation in those economic incentives and that degree of alignment with the other goals. So what will end up with happening is that we might end up with our climate sensitive agriculture increasing productivity or helping to adapt to climate change, for example, but it won't fundamentally be shifting the whole system to be more environmentally sustainable, taking into account production and consumption all the way along the food chain and all of these different dimensions. The second aspect of transformation that there were early signs of, but we're not there yet, is around people and relationships. So I was very surprised by the large number of ministerial statements and from the panel who spoke about the importance of bringing people together, governance, and this has come up before. So that there's an increasing recognition that you need to bring together in order to get anything done, quite a complex range of different sectors and stakeholders. And that's being done. I mean, there were lots of terms that were used: associations, hubs, commissions, groups, the various words that were used to describe these increasing efforts to coordinate and to bring the sectors together. So that's real progress, that's real action, and it's not at the point where you're really seeing a real transformation in the way that people in the system are relating and connecting to each other yet. And then the third aspect is the way that people are thinking. So what is clear is that people say, and you heard this in the opening speeches and the closing speeches, they're talking about the need for holistic approaches at bringing the system together, integrating food throughout all of these different goals. But you're not really fundamentally seeing a shift in mindsets that says, when I'm going to take action Y in the system, I'm going to think about what impact it's going to have on other people and other goals.
I think you understood what I meant. So thanks so much when I said that I follow the lead often of Corinna Hawkes. She was very sharp and self-critical on what the system must be doing better. I think it's now maybe interesting, very interesting in fact to hear a second round of comments from our panelists exactly on what they would expect the FAO to do better in terms of strengthening local food systems, and also to what extent us, the think tanks, the civil society, the researchers can complement maybe a crucial global body like the FAO in these efforts. Again, we start with Madame Alcazar, please.
Thank you. It's been already very interesting to hear you all. In terms of what we expect, I think there's so much to do. I agree that there is a lot of action, but so much to do. The world is really struggling, so these are difficult moments, and there is a lot to do. But as I was saying before, we have this big problem that can be, in simple terms, say that we have less income, more poverty, and higher food prices. So that's a big problem by itself. And I think that what FAO is now trying to look, it's clear that the work is trying to look at a more integrative way, considering all the different aspects and sustainability with a north of sustainability. I think that's great, and it's also great that we are starting to look more at the food system as a whole system. I think for many years and decades we were always talking about agriculture, we were talking about supply side, demand side, but what we need is to look at the whole chain, from rural to urban as a continuity, not looking at urban and at rural, but at rural to urban as a continuity, and not supply and demand, but the whole chain. I think we need to do a lot of work thinking about that and understanding what's going on in between supply and demand. And I think it's great that FAO is starting to think in those terms, but there is a lot to work there. We need to try to understand what's going on with collection of food, distribution, commercialization channels, and the big problem of waste. That I can clearly see it in Peru and Latin America, that I'm sure is a problem everywhere. There are a lot of inefficiencies besides markets with a few getting most of the revenue and the problem of the smallholder farmers. Besides that problem, we also have inefficiencies and we have waste, and I think we need to understand how to deal with that. Problems with markets, big markets, small markets, particularly traditional markets where we have inefficiencies and waste, and they do play a very important role in this issue of trying to get affordable food for the poor. So I think that FAO has a major role in all this. Besides, continue to work increasing productivity of smallholder farmers and trying to provide, helping us to provide technical assistance and technology. This is each time is more difficult because technology is moving so fast. So the digital divide is gonna hurt the poorest countries. So there is a lot to do there. But besides that, there is a lot to do, I think, in this understanding more what this complex food system, where we have different agriculture, fishery, livestock, where we have agricultural sector, economic sector, health sector, social protection sector. We have different actors, private sector, national government, local government, civil society, and all of that in the context of this supply and demand whole system. And as I was saying, I think we need to look at the middle and see what's going on there. Also, I think FAO should play, and the other institutions, of course, and international organizations, a very important role playing in the linkages between these different actors, particularly researchers, civil society, and governments. We need help with that. It's always difficult to deal with that, and I think they play an important role, and also knowledge sharing, learning from one country to the other. Southern Voice tries to do that, but we need help also on that. And also this monitoring and analyzing price structures and try to figure out which policies which combination of policies we need to deal with these food price problems. And in related to that, while we work and improve the food systems, we also need to, as we were mentioning before, we also need to deal with some social protections and help to deal with hunger and malnutrition and food insecurity. And there is also a lot to do on that side, which I think is being looked less than the other issues. And I wanted to mention, for example, an example that we were studying in the case of Peru and other Latin American countries with COVID times and hunger during the quarantine and COVID times. In several Latin American countries, in South and Central America particularly, we had this what we call common pots or community kitchens, those type of programs that came naturally from the communities without public intervention most cases, and it was a great example of resilience. When we were doing a research to try to look into food systems in building back better after the pandemic, we found that this was a very interesting case in many countries. They played a very important role fighting poverty and fighting the hunger in urban contexts in particular. And at the same time, governments were trying to help by providing cash transfers, but providing food baskets with not much success, because they didn't know how to reach the neediest population. But the population by themselves, they organized themselves in the poorest areas, and they had these community pots, common kitchens, and they got help from churches, from civil society, sometimes from local governments, and from markets also, from the waste of the markets. So the government, after a while, and this is the case of Peru, but it was similar in other cases, after a long while, they thought, okay, let's work with them, and they had to change regulations and laws and try to help these common pots. But the help was not good either. It wasn't what they needed. But we should think in an integrated way. So, for example, these community common pots, we can provide them help to work with the local markets, with vouchers or something like that. So they and try to use the waste from local markets, from supermarkets, from different industries. There's a lot of waste that can be used, not giving them only what is wasted, like normally they get a lot of rice, for example, but what nutritional food, vegetables and proteins too. But with the help of the government, we can articulate markets and local production with this consumer side. So it's just an example, but I think it's the type of things that we have to look into to try to articulate supply, demand, and intermediation.
Thanks so much, Ms. Alcazar. I'm sure Corinox is taking good notes. Ambassador Arvelo, what are your expectations on the FAO new objectives in the coming years? Maybe taking in particular into account the point that Corinox made, that ultimately lack of progress is related to political economy, to the fact that a lot of the issues are driven still by certain incentives that tend to not go on to sustainability improvements. What can you tell us about, what can FAO do about that?
Well, yes, I could, again, use up to 5 hours about this. What Dr. Hawks said earlier truly resonated and should resonate with everybody, because she made an analysis that in a nutshell shows what's going on and what should be happening. There are a number of structural problems, obstacles there. A certain German philosopher wrote about this in the 1840s and so on, explaining how all decisions, all political decisions are economic. And we are the homo economicus. Every decision we take is based upon an economic rationale that underlies all these decisions. So that's about the private sector, but also about government. Governments think about two dimensions in time: today and the next election. So when looking at transforming anything, and something as complex as food systems, that takes a generational approach, that takes years, and even those governments that do not face the electorate, they also have to take into account that other dimension today, so which is common to all. What can FAO do? I need to go back a bit. When I arrived in Rome, for every 100 units of money that came into the coffers of FAO for the regular budget, about 10% on top of that came from extra budgetary contributions. I have mentioned these figures in front of Chief Economist Maximo Torero, and he still has not corrected me, so I guess that I'm doing something right there. Nowadays, for every 100 that come into the regular budget, 350 come from extra budgetary contributions. That's a 35-fold increase. What does that mean? That means that the core business of FAO, for what FAO was created, which is to eradicate hunger and poverty in the world, is receiving that core business, is receiving X amount of money that has been frozen time and again for the past 12 some years. I know a little bit about that because at one moment in time I chaired the FAO Commission on Budget for the General Conference, and that was the second to last time in which the budget was raised in real terms. And we could, again, talk about that for a long time, because that goes to the interest of the richest countries to control not just FAO, but all the UN family. So restricting the democratic legitimacy of what is resolved by member states in the proper commissions and councils and committees and working groups and so on, and then attaching, earmarking and attaching their will to what comes from extra budgetary resources. So that is a problem, because the amounts of money that we're talking about, not just flowing into FAO, but also to the other Rome-based agencies, IFAD and WFP, and the development program, and all of the other institutions within the UN family, have this structural constraint. When I came in into my current position, also food systems transformation was not a priority. The priorities were increasing production and productivity. And in that wave of discussions, then we were talking about adequate nutrition and food security as this concept that needed to be cross-cutting and so on. But food system transformation is something that we have been working on, actually, seriously, just in the past 4 to 5 years, even if Dr. Hawks and others have been apprised of the idea and working on the conceptual frameworks for longer than that. So another structural problem is that FAO talks to governments because it is an intergovernmental organization. I was in Rome already when the idea of involving the private sector and the civil society were first put on the table. This was about 10 years ago. And some colleagues of mine from the developing world, sadly, stood up in meetings where I was attending, like you are now, saying that their countries, their governments would first withdraw from FAO if they were going to be seated next to representatives from the private sector or civil society organizations. Those countries are still members of FAO, and we have mechanisms for channeling inputs from both the private sector and the civil society. So that battle was won, and at great political price, but still there's a lot to do. I could talk on and on, but about waste, let me just say that waste is one of the subjects that I enjoy the most talking about. I have done some research, I have sat down with experts on this, and it is also one of the areas, I will just say this, one of the areas in which this contradiction is best seen. Making any change in the wastage of food is a Himalaya. It's a very complex issue because the food system takes into account food losses, which is what happens after you reap the crops, and food waste, which is what happens after the final consumer purchases the food. So any change in that dynamic, which is factored in the food system, will encounter enormous difficulties because those that stand to lose, again in the private sector, will simply will oppose it, not because they're bad people, but simply because everything is arranged in such a way that the wastage of food, which in North America and Europe alone amounts to 1.3 billion tons, which is more than the global production of rice and corn, stand to lose all of the chain structures that are already in place. So every single possibility that we can think of and that we're working on in terms of transforming the food systems will crash into those walls before having an actual effect. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I'm loving this conversation because it's really, all of the speakers are pointing to political economy issues, and my organization and the other think tanks make this point for a long time. Without understanding first the political economy behind all of this, we are not making any progress. And the fact that from different levels, they all mention it, it's fantastic, and I'm sure the audience will have questions around it as well. But before, of course, we hear again from the FAO, Corina Ox here, Dr. Suleri. How do you see the FAO evolving? What are your suggestions for them to do better, given our conversation so far?
Well, thank you. I think I'll refer to this Sharm el-Sheikh Declaration, COP27, where the member countries, they actually stressed upon international financial institutes to be more climate responsive and to be more responsive towards climate vulnerability. Similarly, the FAO member countries, they should also stress upon IFIs to be more hunger responsive and to tackle hunger vulnerabilities on a priority basis. The second thing that I expect from FAO is supporting countries like Pakistan in adopting climate smart agricultural techniques, seed varieties, for example. So for last 5-7 years now, it has become very norm that when the wheat crop, which is our staple crop, when it's ready for cultivation, all of a sudden we start receiving windstorms and rains that destroys a considerable yield of wheat. So we need to work upon the new genome and new seed varieties. Similarly, technology transfer, agriculture technology, use of drones, agriverse, access to agriverse and agri-cloud, if we are using some precision agriculture techniques. And the third, learning from its strengths. Pakistan and India, they are not on talking terms, but 2 years ago when there was this locust attack, it was FAO's platform that was bringing the officials from Pakistan, India, Afghanistan on a daily basis. They were discussing the locust situation and how to control it. So similarly, FAO can be a platform to bring together countries in developing countries, especially in Africa and in our part of Asia, where we have a lot of regional conflicts, bringing those countries together so that they can learn from each other about what works and what doesn't work on adopting to climate smart agriculture, what works and what doesn't work on tackling food waste and improving food governance, etc. And my final point, what I expect from FAO, we need to have some evidence-based, research-based recommendations on genetically modified food and hybrid varieties. I know it's a controversial issue, but then we know that in developing countries, there is more and more appetite for GMOs and genetically modified food. In Pakistan, we haven't allowed it yet because we are still working on our safety and biosafety guidelines. But then if some multinational comes and tells a government official that this food is being consumed very safely by these 50 or 60 countries, and countries like Pakistan, they can also welcome it, that's where we need to get some impartial evidences. And what does it mean not only to have safety and biosafety guidelines, but to enact them? So what are the practical requirements to enact them, whether countries like Senegal or Pakistan, whether we will be able to enact those safety and biosafety guidelines? Are we going to another trap? So I think these are some of the practical questions for which one looks at World Food Program. And very final point, I can often see, at least in Pakistan, this cousin jealousy going on between World Food Program and FAO. Now, of course, for us, while hosting more than 4 million Afghan refugees, for us, World Food Program and FAO and all other members of SEGAR, they are equally important. Now, if they are not talking to each other, so it means that there's something fundamentally wrong. And when we are talking of improving food governance at national level, we also need to make this claim that this governance at global level among these institutions, that also needs to be improved. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Soleri. Great points as well, and all of the three speakers. I wish more of the FAO management were here to listen to these fantastic ideas. I now give the floor to Dr. Hawkes. Maybe feel free to address any of the points raised, but it would be particularly interesting to see, also given your position, how would you recommend FAO to solve the one problem you pointed to, the fact that ultimately it's all about incentives, political economy. So what can be done about that as FAO? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, lots of things to say here. I think one of the things I think is important as a principle for FAO, for me and for many others, is its role as to use this word, which is really not based in political economy at all, but of neutrality. There's no such real thing as neutrality, in the sense that there's always a power imbalances that are going on. But nevertheless, I think FAO does have an important role in this idea of neutrality. And the reason I think that it's important to mention that here is because I think it can and should step back as an organization and put out on the table really what the system is. What are we talking about when we're talking about food system, the agri-food system. Who are all of the actors in it? Why does it even matter to talk about it as a system? This was mentioned before about clarifying some of these issues, demystifying how production is linked to consumption. So, and really embracing the complexity of the system and really moving away. I would argue that FAO is the right institution to be moving away from solely a focus on productivity and production, which is its history, not originally, but in the decades earlier, to being a food systems organization and what that actually means. So, and how, and putting it out there, right, this is what bringing the system together looks like. This is what being concerned about everything from productivity, about inputs, fertilizers, the middle of the chain, informal, small and medium-sized enterprises, chronic diseases, undernutrition, and all of the different parts of the chain in between production and consumption, to put it crudely, waste and so on. This is what putting the system together looks like in a way which is not going to get weighed down by its own complexity and not get weighed down by complication, but try and clarify to people how you can work through this, how you can work through this system to really bring the benefits that the food system can. So I think it can, as an institution, put out there, this is what it means to work in the system. This is what it involves. That's the first thing. The second thing is to say, and by the way, when you do that, it's going to be really hard, and you're going to meet power imbalances everywhere you look. And actually taking quite a kind of neutral position on this, on the political economy and power imbalances, by just saying that this is what they are, these are reality, and having more courage as an organization to put them out there and say there are these power imbalances that exist. And when you try and do X, you're going to face this barrier because somebody else has got more power and so on. But just putting it out there, I think that's what it can do. Can it wade in and solve all of these problems and be a political actor? No, it shouldn't be doing that. But it can be putting the issues on the table as issues that governments and all actors, including the private sector, including civil society, should be thinking about it. So embracing, one, the whole system, and embracing and being clear, power matters, there are power imbalances, let's put it out there. And so that's the kind of the neutrality part. And there's lots of tools and things that can be used that I won't talk about because I'll talk for too long otherwise. But the third thing that I think it needs to do as an organisation is really get its own house in order in the way that it works as an institution. So this has already been referenced with regard to, does FAO talk to WFP in dealing with emergencies at the country level? Not really. I'm not even sure that different FAO projects in the same country actually talk to each other at this point in time. And that's partly because of this structural point that was raised earlier. When I've been engaging with FAO for many years before I came into the institution, but one of the things I hadn't realised was so profound, which is exactly this issue that you raised about financing. Because of the fact that the regular budget has stayed here, did go up in the last conference back in a few weeks ago, but it's meant that the staff just go out and get project funding in order to do the work that they want to do. It's completely not coordinated. It's not like, okay, this is strategic. This is what we should be focused on. This is how we work together. There's people going to run around looking for donor money. And that means that then they go in and they do the project. It's not a transformative project. It's probably a very good project, but it's not transformative. And it means you don't have any incentive to talk to anyone else. You just have to talk to your donor in order to get the project done. So structurally, that is really an issue. I have to say I was a little shocked when I came into the organisation just to see how massively it influenced the efficiency of the organisation, and in fact makes it a lot less efficient as an organisation. So I think there's a lot of work we need to do to get our house in order, to shift from a productivity organisation to a food systems organisation, to shift from an organisation that's focused on just doing these projects to one that's focusing on really transformative action, and an organisation that isn't really working in partnership in the way that it could, to really working in partnership. And I have to say that coming in quite new to the organisation, the smartness of the people inside of FAO is quite extraordinary. It's full of such smart, good people who were so committed. Yes, there were those who were just there for the salary and so on, but mainly it's people who are just really, really good. And the potential of the organization is huge, and it needs to be pushed from the outside. We need to have civil society in the private sector and our own members pushing FAO so that it can have the transformative impact than it could. I think we need to be very open that we need to have that outside push to achieve what we could achieve, while also standing up and saying, we're going to stand back and be as neutral as we possibly can and putting these issues on the table, and embracing the diversity of different views. And in our governance, that we're able to do that and stand up as an organisation strongly and do that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. I have been working myself in and around FAO since 2008 maybe, and believe me, this is one of the best discussions I've ever heard about FAO. And I wish we could have this more regularly. And for that, I would like us to give really a hand for the panelists and also for Corinna Oxley, because you may not work in and around FAO, but you got a crash course on really the potential, but also some of the challenges. And again, thanks for putting forward very concrete thematic ideas on what needs to be done better, what should be the new objectives, but also very fundamental structural issues here on the way the organization is funded and the way the organization is organizing itself. So fantastic, really honest points here. Now we have exactly, so also thanks for sticking to the time, half an hour for a real conversation, both with questions online and from the floor here in Rome. Who would like to start? And please state who you are and quickly, and no speeches, please, really quick comments and questions to keep the conversation as lively as it was. Who would like to kick off? Sir, yes, please come. Tell us who you are. We have, of course, we have a mic so that the people online will also have the benefit. So introduce quickly yourself and your comment question.
Yes, my name is Kagem Maso. I work for One CGIR. I'm the director of the Impact Area Platform on Environmental Health and Biodiversity. What I'm going to say is not really a question, just is a comment. And before I make my comment, I would really like to also to tell you some areas where I see potential collaborations with the think tanks as well as the FAO. But starting the comments, I started the 3 days at the workshop, and initially I have selected the blue sessions because the title were very impressive. But on day 2, I have to run away, to move to the green and to the red for simple reasons. Working in the global south, there are 2 things you see on ground and the things you hear in the room. And you start asking yourself whether what you are blind when you go to the field, or there is something that is not clear. Just to make my long story short, there is really need, everything you've said, I concur. I'm really very happy. I concur with you, Francisco, that it was a very productive panel discussion. There is a need of a bit of impact assessment. I agree with most of the initiatives being the initiatives of FAO or other development partners. I understand the principle of neutrality for sure. Who do we get to do that independent impact assessment so that when we really talk about transforming food systems, there is a system in place that allows to validate, cross-validate what we hear in the blue panel, plenary discussions. That is the first comment. And this really takes a bit of transparency of the actors. How do we bring the actors really to be transparent? Because if we don't get the correct information, which we should have gotten from the blue panels, but I ended up getting it from the green partners and from the red partners. Then we really need to think what thing we can do. I'm just talking, I know it's difficult to get it done, but how do we make it very transparent? After making these two comments, I would also like to share what we are doing in terms of the CGIAR, also to contribute to this agenda.
Briefly, please.
Yes, very briefly. We have 5 platforms which really are very important for food systems. One is on environmental and biodiversity. The other one is on nutrition, health and food security. The other one on poverty reduction, livelihoods and jobs. The other one is on gender, youth and inclusion. The 5th one is on climate change and adaptations. And we have, each of them have 4 functions. You talked about bringing people together, and one of the missions is to really to make sure that the platform creates community of practices to deal with the food system transformation. So we have community of practices. Then we have to acknowledge our weaknesses. So we need to deepen our capacities, research capacities, development capacities internally and externally, working with the cross partners. And amplify what we do. There is a lot of things that are sitting on shelves in terms of technologies, in terms of innovations. How do we get them out? I will pause here for now. Thank you.
Great contribution. So also welcome questions, but if you have a very specific point, let's work together with the FAO in this way. For example, like CGIAR has done, please, that comment is also, gentleman at the bottom. And also please let me know if there's any question from online. But sir, you have the floor.
Hello, Max Soto-Baumann from the German Institute of Development and Sustainability, known as IDES. I have 2 questions. The first goes to Ms. Hawkes. From your observation of the summit, you said a lot of activity, which is good, but not transformational, which is not so good, and that's because of the economic incentives. Could you maybe name the most important economic incentives? And then, I mean, more importantly, where do we need to go? What would be your kind of markers for real transformation in these systems? And also, are we going to see new initiatives by the FAO in the upcoming next years? And then my next question starts with a comment Mr. Arvelo made on the large amount of extra budgetary resources. I think it's about 80% or so. That means, of course, a lot of informal influence from the northern countries. And I wonder, now that there's a DG from a developing country, when we look back the last 4 years, does this mean that it has brought a greater representation of the global south in the organization? Maybe also bigger legitimacy. So in this broader kind of political context, have you seen some change in the last years? Thank you.
Let me see if we can collect a couple of more. Yes, because also these are not easy questions, so we leave the... Let me see your hands, please, just to understand. Yes, Madame here, and then these 2 gentlemen, and then one online. Yeah? Okay. We start from the lady, and then the 2 gentlemen, and then online, and then we respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is Ainhoa Marin. I am from, I'm a researcher at Elcano Royal Institute in Madrid, Spain. I'm part of the European think tank network group. Thank you very much for the excellent panel. I have 2 questions. So first one has to do with one key issue, which is the use of food as a weapon. We have the experience of last week with Russia withdrawing from the Black Sea Grain Initiative. And so this agreement, there was a UN agreement enabling, we know, as we all know, the Ukrainian grain to be an export to other countries in the world. So my first question is about precisely the role of these international institutions, organizations like FAO in addressing these huge supply distortions. If there is any possibility of addressing them. The second one is related to the previous one. It has to do with the regional markets. Thinking about, for example, the African continent, specifically Sub-Saharan Africa, in opinion of the panelists, are the regional institutions, the regional economic communities need to have a bigger role than the national governments trying to organize and make coherence improvements in food security systems, not only national, but in a regional level? Or do you think that national government should be highlighted in the international institutions' actions? No? That's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, these are very, very important questions. So let me get the one online and then we come back to you, because I think you can also not exaggerate with how much they can take on. And then I've already seen the two gentlemen here. So let's hear from the one online and then we respond.
So the question online is from Chilufia from the SDG2 Advocacy Hub. UN FSS stocktake was a good opportunity for engagement and introspection. It is clear that there is a lot of interest and effort being put in taking a systems approach to solving the challenges facing food systems. It is also clear that countries need help to make the necessary transformative shifts to our food systems. How do you see FAO evolving to meet this very ambitious challenge of supporting the drive for transformative change, especially at the country level during a time of crisis?
Thank you very much also for the participants online. Very easy questions. So I guess a couple of them were directly related to Corinna Hawkes. Which incentives? Can you give an example and what can be done about it? And maybe this last one about the country level response. And then I will pass the floor to Mr. Arvello about the issue of has the Director General from China made any dent to the rebalancing of powers. And then I don't know if any of the other two researchers want to take up the issue of supply chain distortion, which is also very crucial, given the example of Ukraine and the regional institutions. So we'll start maybe with Corinna Hawkes.
Thanks, yeah, and allow me just to stress that I am speaking from my position as Director of the Food Systems and Food Safety Division. I'm not speaking for the FAO Director General or anybody else. I'm really coming from the perspective of the role that I've been given and the mandate that I have to try and catalyse a more systems-based approach across FAO. And of course, the FAO Director General has a series of priorities and so on. And what I'm saying doesn't necessarily reflect that. It reflects the challenge that I face in trying to help the organisation move in a direction which is set out by the DG in the strategic plan. About this more systems approach. When it comes to the economic piece, it's a really and the incentives. It's a really tricky one, and I'm actually just going to draw on work that I've done when I was a professor in my previous role, looking at these issues. I mean, one can start talking about capitalism and all of these things in very, very, very quickly. But I'd rather just come at it from the perspective of some of the practical changes that need to happen when it comes to the economic incentives. And the first is the way that money is currently spent in the system. We talk a lot about development donor money and so on, but of course the biggest amount of money that is spent in the food system is from the private sector. There's an enormous amount of money that is spent in the system by the private sector. Do we have any idea how that's spent? Not really, no. Have we really measured and understood where it's being directed? Not really, no. Given the trillions that are spent, if it was spent differently, could it make a huge difference? I'm sure that it could. So I think we need to start looking at how money is currently being spent by the private sector, as well as the donors, as well as the public sector, who spend money just it's a lot less. And all of that, we need to understand the financial flows in the system and how that money is being spent, and then say, how can we spend that money differently? And that would really, I think, be transformative in the incentives that we're creating in the system. The second is around the private sector. The food sector is dominated by the private sector. I mean, I just mentioned the private sector, but to do with the incentives faced by the private sector. Which flow back to small farmers and flow back to all of the informal sector, all of the millions of small actors in the system. And think about the incentives that large private sector actors face and look at corporate governance mechanisms and understand how those corporate governance mechanisms could incentivize social and environmental goals as well as the standard profitability goals. And because at the moment corporate governance structures don't really allow that. The fact that you have to report to your shareholders every quarter is an obvious example. So I think there's actually a question to be asked in food systems about what does corporate governance look like in order that the incentives that the private sector, who I don't believe to be nasty people, I just believe to be responding to a set of certain incentives when they make decisions which aren't sustainable, face. And I think the private sector could be leaders in the sustainability space because they are responding to risks in sourcing and insecurity, and water's running out, climate's changing. And they could be real leaders in the space and actually push governments in the right direction. But to do that, they need to have governance structures that incentivize them. And third, just very briefly, I think the power of the public purse. I mean, we should sort out public procurement. I mean, every single government entity who is serving food to its people should be sourcing and using that financial power through public procurement to make sure that it's sourcing a healthy food from sustainable sources that are supporting livelihoods. It's hard, it's not easy, it takes a systems approach, but that's something that the public sector can do to change those economic incentives. I can come back to the next question if you'd rather move on to someone else before I respond again.
Yes, thank you. Maybe Ambassador Alvaro about this issue of the new Director General. Has anything changed in that type of dynamics?
The dynamics always change. Whenever a government changes in a given country, even if it's from the same party, you see changes. And in an international organization, the only position of administration that is actually elected by the member states is that of the top position, in this case, the Director General of FAO. Let me just tell you that the percentage of extra budgetary resources entering FAO is 350%, roughly, of the actual core budget. So that's a figure that we should take into account. Dr. Chu, the Director General, came up with a great idea for trying to iron out the consequences of this frozen core budget. And he came up with the 4 betters: better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life. What does that mean? It is, I would say, kind of a Asian thinking. I've lived in Asia for a number of years, in Eastern Asia. So it's, I wouldn't say Chinese, but an Eastern Asian philosophy of inclusiveness in terms of a conceptual approach to the fact that the core budget is so limited. I once wrote a paper that I would need to find and maybe revise. It's called The FAO of One. And what I meant by that paper, 5-6 pages, was to analyze how the freezing of a core budget will eventually, down the road, signify that whatever it is that goes into that budget, there will come a time in which that will only be enough to pay for one person. And that all of the work would need to be done by the so-called consultants, which is an euphemism, because you walk down the corridors at FAO and you start stopping people at random, and you ask them, what do you do here? And they will say, I'm a consultant, which is not true, because a consultant is someone that you bring in for a specific issue, expertise, I have a PhD on whatever, and so I will consult you or about X, Y, or Z. In this case, it's so-called consultants, quote unquote, that do a sizable amount of the work at FAO because they cannot be paid through the core budget because it's frozen. So they they become subcontractors for national cooperation agencies. The Dominican Republic is a small country, and not just small because we're larger than, say, the Netherlands or Israel, but we have very little global influence. So we do not have an international cooperation agency. If we did, and I was appointed as the head of it, I would tell my boss, the president, look, sir, let's lean on FAO, let's lean on IFAD, let's lean on these international organizations for getting better bang for our buck. We would put aside, we would need politically to do X, and that costs $1 million. So instead of investing $1 million from our own staff, we would need to get the real consultants, we will need to hire people, we would need to build this palace to house all these workers. Let's just give it to FAO, let's design a project, this project in the countries that we need to influence, and it'll cost 900, 800, 700,000. So the money that we save, we can do something else. We can build on a further project down the road. And I don't want to reduce FAO, IFAD, and others to that, but this is the way that many powerful governments are seeing these organizations as subcontractors of their international cooperation agencies. What's a consequence of this, politically speaking? That no one will oppose it. My own country receives projects. Projects are being designed and implemented in my country, benefiting my people, the people who are paying my salary because of their taxes, and we go hand in hand to Berlin, and to Paris, and to Madrid, and to Washington, for sure, and to many other, and here in Rome, and all of the capitals of the G7 countries and other developed countries. We go hand in hand saying, contribute, please, pretty please, with sugar on top, to our development. And the answer that they give us is, well, let's design and implement a project through FAO, through IFAD, and we say, thank you so much. So it is not me, it is not any of my colleagues from the G77, from the developing world, that is going to stand up and say, let's do FAO transformation so that it goes back to what it was. It would need to be a larger, broader, compact, the international community, even developed countries, to reassess, to see how we can best use these resources, these organizations that we have, so that we can think, like Dr. Hawk said, strategically, and not just putting a solution here and a solution there without being holistically. Thanks so much. Yeah.
It's also a great answer. A lot of thought for those who work with FAO here. Maybe can I ask you to take the question on the regional institutions? How do you see the role of regional institution, or is it really mostly work to be done at the national level? Can the international community and the FAO support more regional approaches to solve food systems issue? That was one of the other questions. How do you see that from Latin America? Or the Andean community are actually active? I mean, do you look at mostly at the national work, or is it the role also for the regional institution to be strong?
May I just say this, just 30 seconds? Of course, the lady from Spain, of course, national governments are the first and the last institutions responsible for what goes on within their jurisdictions. So it starts and it ends with each national government. And of course, national governments cannot do it by themselves. So we need, speaking for my government, we need all the help we can get from anyone able and willing to help.
Anything to add?
I think working regionally is also a challenge. It definitely is interesting, and we can have more besides helping each other and learning from each other, we can have more power vis-a-vis other regions and vis-a-vis the globe in the north. But it's a challenge, and I guess it's difficult. It's politically difficult, it's economically difficult, I'm fascinated too with this discussion of the political economy of these institutions, and I am thinking a lot in similarities. I work a lot on migration issues, and I'm thinking on how this same situation of power, of budget, and UN agencies is replicated in terms of migration, and where you have all these institutions trying to help without talking to each other and working with different countries that deal with migration in Latin America and as well as other regions. And when we try to work regionally, it gets more complicated. So I am aware of the difficulties, but of course, I think there's a lot to gain from that. It's definitely a lot of gain from that.
Thanks so much. Can I ask you to answer the question, very easy question on the issue of supply disruption? Can something be done at this multilateral level, for example, from FAO, when you have something as huge as the key player in the particular production of fertilizer, for example, to use food as a weapon?
Use of food or energy as weapon is bad. It's bad because it creates artificial shortage. It's bad because it leads all other producers of those commodities to hoard them, to put export bans on them. And it's bad because if there was someone from World Food Program, they would be telling you that almost 70% of their wheat supplies for distribution in conflict-affected and famine-affected areas were coming from Ukraine, which they are not able to access anymore. Of course, at a local level, it creates all sort of those hoarding and panic buying. But then if you flip the picture, and that is, can we think of some way of penalizing the countries which are not respecting international norms and rules, but then allow somehow this food supply, which of course is a difficult question, not only allowing food supplies, but also providing food supplies. Now, I'm not talking of Russia, I'm talking of Afghanistan. Afghanistan government, the de facto government, Taliban, they are under sanction. But it's not affecting Taliban at all. It is affecting the 40 million Afghan people who are not able to get any sort of external aid. Even World Food Program based in Pakistan, if they have to distribute aid in Afghanistan, they need to find some non-state actors which are not existent there under this Taliban rule. So I think we need to, it's a complex situation. I don't have any recommendation, but we need to perhaps think of applying our sanctions sparingly, thinking of the people first, and as they say in English, we should not throw a baby out with the bath water. We need to somehow save the baby. Afghan people, I really wanted to share their plight at this forum. For almost 2 years now, again I'm repeating because we are next door neighbor, it's the sanctions, they are not affecting Taliban at all. They are affecting Afghan people because it's the people who are not able to get any external assistance.
Very, very good answer. Thank you very much. So I'm afraid for the sake of time, we still need to answer to the friends from the SDG 2 Hub, but we have to do 2 questions. So if we take quickly, if you can answer your 2 questions, the gentleman in this row, and then together with the SDG Hub question, we will get the final answer. Please, microphone.
Thank you very much. My name is Michael Wirtz. I'm working on the Nexus Food Security Project with our colleagues here at IAI. I'm based in Washington, DC. I have a question for Corinna Hawkes, since you have been so refreshingly open about the need to lobby FAO to move more aggressively forward into that direction. I was wondering how that can be and should be done from the outside and from an NGO perspective. Because it seems to me, again, I'm in Washington, if I see processes at the World Bank, they're driven by Ajay Banga right now. If I see processes at the Inter-American Development Bank, they are driven by Alexandre Meira da Rosa, who is the policy planning chief. Cindy McCain, we hear, is very ambitious with the World Food Program. So there's a lot of new leadership in a number of organizations, and these seem to be all more top-down than bottom-up processes. So what are your suggestions to the degree that you can tell us? Are there people at the top level at the FAO that would be interested and willing to drive these processes more aggressively as we need to, or does this go through important donor countries? What are effective access points for organizations like ours that deeply care about these issues? Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you can pass the mic to the gentleman here, and then we get the answers.
Thank you very much. I'm Johannes Svensson from IDRI, the Institute of International Development and International Relations in Paris. We're also a part of the ETTG network. I had a question. I really like the focus on the political economy of the food system transformations and the focus on the food system itself. And of course, this means coordinating very diverse actors by essence. At the global level and also at the national level, because I imagine, I mean, that was said before as well, that many of the specific political economies are anchored nationally. And then I wonder, I mean, the FAO has more or less recently gone through a kind of a decentralization reform, and so with the current setup of how the FAO operates, how present or how could it engage with global, but maybe my question is especially around the national sort of processes of coordinating different actors around a food system transformation reform agenda. Is it by, I mean, could it take a leading role, or is that a role better handed over to sort of national actors? That was, yep.
Thank you. I think these last two questions, and partly the one from the SDG2 Hub, go in the same direction. Internally and externally, what can be done to support the direction that Corinna Hock was pointing to. So I would certainly need to leave the floor for that to Corinna Hock, but also 1 minute if there is any other of the panelists who want to chip in. But first, Corinna Hock, please.
Thanks very much for the questions. So on this question from the SDG2 Hub about FAO evolving to support transformation, at the first instance, we have to set the agenda about what we're talking about here. If we are going to use the word transformation, we're going to use the word system, we just have to be clear what we are talking about. And we are not talking about what it means to act as a system in practice. We haven't done that as an organization. We haven't done that as a world. We put the slogans out there. We put the labels out there. As an institution, we need to stand up and say, this is what we mean by working as a system. This is what we mean by transformation. And this is what we think it really needs to be done to do that transformation. I'm going to be starting that process in my role as a director of the Division of Food System, just to get the narrative and to start communicating it much, much better. So I think as an organization, there is a need to communicate this much, much more clearly. So just the communications and clarity about what it is that we're actually talking about when we talk about food systems, demystifying sense making. Second, if I can come to the third question next, about coordination of national actors. So we have a whole program of work designed to support governments in the development of their governance and coordination for food systems approaches. We had a workshop this morning on this. So I'll just share with you what two countries told me. They said, I was asking them about the work of my team in their country, and they said, what your team did from my division is to come in and help make the connections we needed to make. We didn't realize we needed to connect with X, Y, and Z and such people because we didn't understand how the whole food system worked. In my division, we have that expertise, not across the whole of FAO, but that's just the work of my division, and that's what I'm sharing with you today. And in another country context, we realized that the nation state needed to link with the urban and the municipal, the local level. So we started to make those connections. So we were trying to just bring that system together. And we're doing that work in several countries. In fact, we've got a new program starting up with UNDP when we're going to be doing more of that. So we do this direct work at the country level about coordination, about bringing together the governance to support governments who just don't have the capacity to do it. The third point about supporting FAO moving forward and top down, what I will share with you is that FAO, the Director General, has been very clear that he wants the work to be run by its directors. I'm a director. There's quite a few of us across the organisation, some of which run more administrative units and some like me, which are technical divisions. And he wants the directors to be empowered to make the changes that he set out in the strategic framework, which I'm 100% behind. I'm 100% behind the 4 betters. I wouldn't be working for FAO if I wasn't behind it. Let me be very clear. I'm very supportive of the strategic framework of the organisation. And I'm not just saying that because it's the right thing to say. It's really coming from my heart and the evidence that's gone into that. So what we need as directors is to be empowered by having people come to us and say, this is what we want you to do. This is what we need from you. I'm doing a process now and I'm going to talk to countries and saying, what do you need from us? And they're so not used to people from FAO asking them the question, they almost don't know how to answer it. But I'm saying, yes, I'm not interested. I see FAO as a public service organisation. We serve people, that's what we should be doing. So come and tell us what you need from each of the divisions. Look at the organogram, which is also out on the website. Understand the divisions and saying, this is what we need from you. And for donors to actually come to us and say, how can we work with you as a system, as opposed to giving you all of these separate projects. So there's a very strong set of directors that have been put into place by the current Director General. He is focused on enhancing his directors. And I will say that is perhaps something that isn't understood outside the organisation, that perhaps could be helpful moving forward.
Yes, one last, please.
Idea. I just wanted to emphasize the importance of this, what you mentioned about labels, because I am afraid we need to make sure, or FAO need to make sure that we don't end up with lots of projects and documents with a sentence on transformation of food systems, like happened with gender perspective. I'm afraid that may happen. Whatever we do it has to include transformation of food systems, and we have to be very careful of what, as you said, just that.
Oh, I think we need to give the time, and thanks again for this fantastic panel. I repeat, this is a crash course in FAO and in even what is the FAO of the future. I think we have recorded it. I will listen to it very carefully and again, because I think it's a very good result, to be honest, and a lot of fantastic ideas here. But now we need to give the floor to Ibrahima Itie, our distinguished fellow from Senegal, not to necessarily summarize it all, but please enlighten us with some final remarks on the way forward. You have the floor, and then we will conclude. Thanks for the interpreters and others to stay on, but it was a fantastic, rich debate. Please, Ibrahim.
Thank you. I think we came to discuss what we should do with FAO to transform food systems, what FAO should do to help farmers. We ended up discussing how to transform FAO. And that was really interesting. That was really interesting. But first of all, from the panel, we understood one of the panelists insisted in the fact that we need to involve the private sector because usually when we are in these type of activities, people tend to stress on the public sector and on civil society, forgetting about the private sector. And from my own experience, I know it's not easy to work with the private sector. The public sector does not know how to work with the private sector. In a project where I work on reform and policy, I was always surprised when dealing with the public sector to see that when they work for the private sector, they do not involve the private sector. They work for the private sector, but the private sector is not involved. I have many experiences of that. And in interrogating that, we end up understanding that it's not that they don't want, it's a problem of capacity. They don't know how to take that. So thank you for drawing our attention to the need to involve the private sector. I was struck with Professor when she said that a lot have been done, a lot of actions, but it's not transformative. And I think that's key. That's why, given that in the next 2 years, countries will be working towards UN FSS +4, it's important that this question of transformation be at the heart. And that is the role of the hub, it's the role of FAO, but also we should not forget that countries have also those difficulties working with systems. If you go to our countries, they work with sectors. And FAO comes to the agricultural sector. They don't think about the system. Even coordination is a problem. So yes, we need to deal with how to transform FAO, but in our thinking, in our intervention, we have to really keep in mind that to implement the national pathway, the countries have to get together and learn how to implement things in a systemic way, in systems. And that's not something that is easy. It takes a lot of work, that takes a lot of coordination, it takes a lot of understanding to be able to do that. And based on the discussion, we know that incentives are important. Let's not forget about other impediments. Economic incentives are very important, but you also have social norms, you have culture. There are other root causes why, when we want to transform, it breaks down. And I will refer to the Global Sustainable Development Report that is going to come out. We already have the draft. And the report tried to work on a framework, a transformation framework, showing how transformation works in phases, the emergence phase, the acceleration phase, and the stabilization phase. And in each phase, you have levers that you can mobilize, but there are so many impediments that can strike down the innovation or the good practice, the pilot, so that it will not scale up. So we have to think through that. Those impediments, including incentives, are extremely important because they are crucial. And one of those impediments is the fact that when you are promoting those systems that are sustainable, don't forget about the unsustainable systems. People will gain, who gain from the unsustainable systems will oppose the sustainable systems. So you have to work in both systems, see how to push for the sustainable one, but how you can make sure that this unsustainable one breaks down and phase out. And to do that, you have to identify those who are likely to lose in the breakdown of those systems, and see how you can buy their collaboration, their partnership, so that, and part of that is to put also resources so that their loss is minimized. So there are a lot of things, I think, in this framework of transformation that we need to look into. We need to build capacity at the national level so that the governments are able to work with other stakeholders systematically and not have a sectoral. So a lot of things to do, and I'm glad the panelists have shown the complexity. And the panelists draw attention on the political economy of this. This political economy is very important. It's not just the political economy, but that's one main point that we need to take into account. Just one word on regional and national levels. Food systems work in a way that we cannot just close it at the national level because the food systems are interlinked at the regional level. So if you really want the national level to be able to succeed, you need to take into account the regional level. If I take the case of Africa, my country, Senegal, cannot ignore what is happening in West Africa because the markets are in West Africa. And things can be cheaper when we take into account that part of the market. So discussing the food systems, we have also to look at the different levels, the local level, the national level, but also the regional level. And those are interconnected. Decentralization is very important in this case, and that happens at the local level with the mayor, with the municipalities. They have a role to play. At the national level, you have the government with all the other, the private sector, but also at the regional level, regional organizations have a role to play in that. So I think in terms of the reflection, we have to take that into account. Let me just finish on the last note. I think we are grateful to FAO, to all the panelists, but the fact that we have put a finger on the structural problem with FAO is extremely important because it shows us, we all live in that, in project oriented and so on. I think the think tank have to start being aware of that and accompany the process, the internal process being currently initiated in FAO, and see how to make sure that other actors could push for an FAO which is more seen as a system organization than a project organization, more seen as going for transformation rather than production. In our country, when we talk about FAO, we think about Ministry of Agriculture, we think about production. We don't think about other things. And I was discussing with the Ministry of Agriculture and telling him, you cannot succeed because almost 70% of what is really making your ministry function is outside of your ministry. If you talk about water, it's outside of your ministry. You have the Ministry of Water. If you talk about markets, it's outside of your ministry. So you have to learn how you can work with others and have something that is that works as a system. I think that's something that we have taken from this discussion. We thank the panel for this great contribution, and I'm sure Southern Voice and I will benefit from this. We thank the audience with these great questions that came from you. And I was told that you are invited for food and drinks and to continue the discussion behind. And thank you to the organizers for giving us this opportunity. Really thankful for that. Thank you.